Mad Max Fury Road is one of the best action films I've ever seen, and it fully converted me into a Mad Max fan. I fuck with the characters, I fuck with the world, I fuck with all that good shit. So naturally, when Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, came out a while back, I saw it in theaters at the soonest opportunity. And after doing so, I can say with a Hundo P guarantee that God George, as Video Kojima would say, delivered another dub. It also has had a lot of discourse surrounding it, much of which doesn't even have anything to do with the actual movie. So now that the dust has settled, I'll give my opinion on all of that. But first, I'll give a quick review. What Furiosa really brings to the table for the Mad Max franchise is its excellent world building. There's not as much a focus on action as in Fury Road. But with that being said, the action we do get is really good, especially the Warwig attack scene. Speaking of the Warwig, I love the characters etched onto the sides. Looks like some ancient art type shit. References to ancient history and mythology, particularly of Greek and Roman ilk, is a reoccurring theme in Furiosa that I think is metal as fuck. Examples include Dementis using a chariot that uses motorcycles rather than horses, using a Trojan horse-esque method to break into Gastown, and dragging Praetorian Jack by a chariot, which a similar punishment is found in Homer's The Iliad. Speaking of Praetorian Jack, his name is a reference to the Praetorian Guard, who were the bodyguards of Roman emperors. And of course, the presence of historymen that catalog events, and a narrator who specifically describes different ways Furiosa is said to have killed Dementis. And just the whole way the story plays out, it's like a myth, a fable of sorts. Another reference to Greek mythology is found with the administrator of Gastown recreating an 1896 painting called Hylas and the Nymphs. It depicts a tale out of Greek mythology in which the youth Hylas is abducted by nymphs while searching for drinking water. An interesting detail is that once Dementis takes over Gastown, the painting is vandalized, with an arm crudely drawn onto Hylas that grasps one of the nymphs' faces. Here is an artist's recreation. Clearly there's parallels you can draw between this tale and the film. The painting's foreboding vibe of being lulled into danger through false promise lines up with a lot of events throughout the film. For one, it's similar to Furiosa's backstory, as she was kidnapped by Dementis' crew while picking peaches in the green place. There's also Dementis tricking Gastown into letting him in, then proceeding to take it over, as well as Dementis eventually fucking himself over due to actions such as taking Gastown and kidnapping Furiosa in pursuit of glory and greed due to his poor leadership. Now, as for what I thought of the film, mythology aside, the performances were banger. Prior to the film's release, a lot of people were critiquing the casting of Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, but she did a damn good job. I think she really channeled what Furiosa is all about. Never while watching the film was I screeching at the top of my lungs, "That's not my Furiosa," on some not my Roger type shit. And she proved her worth in an action lead star type role. Chris Hemsworth did really well as Dementis. He was a really fun villain. Latchy Holm was good as Immortan Joe. And I really like that not only was Immortan Joe in this movie, because I think he's pretty easily the best Mad Max villain. He's a great fucking villain. But also, in order to, keep things interesting, keep it fresh, they introduced a new villain who was also really good. So I thought that was lovely. It's well directed. It's another banger from God George. My only two real complaints would be that number one, there's a few moments here and there where the CG or the green screen is pretty obvious, while you didn't really have that in Fury Road. And also, the soundtrack isn't nearly as memorable as in Fury Road. But still, fantastic, and definitely, I'd say, the second best Mad Max film. And Mad Max Wasteland needs to happen, man, or at least some new Mad Max movies. I need more of this shit. This shit is some good shit right here. If I could grant one man immortality, it would be God George. No question. Bitch. Now, on to the discourse surrounding this film that I had mentioned earlier. There's been a lot of different discussions had involving this movie. Of course, it didn't do great in the box office. Although it should be mentioned that a significant amount of the budget was paid for by the Australian government, so it's not as big a loss for the studio as it might seem. And who knows, like, in a world that is increasingly dominated by VOD and streaming, I feel like box office numbers start to mean less. For example, Robert Eggers' latest film, The Northman, which fantastic director, fantastic film. That there's a lot of history and mythology going on there as well. But anyway, while it failed to make money through the box office, it eventually ended up turning a profit through VOD and other bullshit like that. And this movie does have really good word of mouth. Pretty much everyone that's seen it, from what I've heard, has liked it. So perhaps that would perhaps be able to help it make its money back to some extent. Though the question would be, does VOD and streaming make enough to be able to make up the difference, like make as much money per capita as theaters do? Or are most movies just not going to be able to make money anymore? I don't know. Because unfortunately, the reality is not as many people are going to theaters as they did pre lockdown. There's a few hits here and there that do really well, but they're rarer than they used to be. So, amidst this uncertainty over the future of theaters, are they going to fall off or whatever? That's the context, the situation that's been going on that people have been talking about when Furiosa came out. So, when it basically had the red carpet strewn out for it on Memorial Weekend and wasn't able to do well, that's led a lot of different people to make a lot of different claims as to why. Now, if you ask me, I'd say the reasons this movie didn't do well is, for one, the aforementioned issue of not as many people going to theaters, as well as the fact that Mad Max was never a particularly huge moneymaker. After all, Fury Road barely broke even. Another thing that may have hurt it is that Mad Max is not in the film, as well as the Furiosa recast. These personally weren't issues to me. Like, after all, everyone's saying, "Oh, it's Mad Max. It's literally the Mad Max in the title. Where's its movie, Mad Max? Where's Mad Max?" Which, to me, the best part of Mad Max is the world, not just Mad Max himself. I see him as being a useful tool with which to view the world through. You know what I mean? Like, the big draw when I hopped into a Mad Max film was, alright, what scenarios is Max gonna stumble on into this time? He's a great character, don't get me wrong, but not a necessary component to me. Like, there's plenty of other really interesting, good characters that could hold a Mad Max film steady, like as was done in Furiosa. And while Charlize Theron was great as Furiosa, I'm not dead set on her having to be the one that plays the character. Same with, I don't think Mel Gibson has to be Mad Max. I was fine with Tom Hardy taking the reins as well. If Anya Taylor-Joy and Tom Hardy were bad, that would be another story, but they aren't. I think major characters being swapped out between actors lays credence to the idea that Mad Max is a tale of legend. The characters are more so concepts than they are specific people. Like Romulus, the legendary Roman king, was said to have founded Rome and managed a shit ton of the administration. But in all likelihood, the acts prescribed to Romulus were the acts of a collection of individuals whose combined efforts made up what we know to be Romulus, but it's cooler and more simple if one guy did all this crazy shit. So yeah, while I didn't mind the recasting and the lack of Mad Max, that probably didn't help it, though I don't think it was a huge deal. Apparently a lot of people ravenously hated the trailer or something, which I can't relate. I thought it was fine. And yeah, I don't know, like a lot of people were saying like, "Oh, after this trailer I thought it would be dog shit, terrible fucking movie. I liked Fury Road. I'm not watching this shit." Which, like, I have way too much faith in George Miller to think he was gonna fuck this movie up, so I don't know what was going on there. Like, even if the trailer was bad, that shit can be cut up in any kind of way and can show unfinished footage. The woman equals woke crowd also emerged from their caverns to give their take, and you're not gonna believe it, their take this time around was woman equals woke.
Like, that's a skinny woman. How is she gonna be invincible against big buff guys?
All they have to do is actually watch it, and they'll realize that's not what happens in the movie. Listen, I hate women as much as the next guy, but you can't be this blatantly much of a fucking bot, dude. Like, you gotta try harder than this. Others were accusing this film of being a soulless cash grab prequel, which you can't do my man George of the Judge like that. He completed the script for Furiosa before he had even started filming Fury Road. Like, this is a story that he wanted to tell. This was an important thing for him. It's not some forced studio bullshit they just whipped up for a quick buck. I mean, Mad Max isn't a super big moneymaker franchise anyway, obviously. Also, let me address the just make good movies crowd real quick. Let me just dispel this myth once and for all. Let me put my cudgel, slam my cudgel down on the table against this case, okay? You're telling me Captain Marvel made over $1 billion because it was on some Kubrick shit? Like, no. Something tells me that quality isn't really what's at play when you look at the seismic gap between how much money Captain Marvel made and the Marvels made. There's something more going on there. Like, I feel like quality is a pretty small part, honestly. And even just recently, it's like the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I don't know if that's exactly on some Kubrick shit either. I kind of think it's not a good movie, to be honest. I just don't see there being a particular correlation of quality and box office success. Maybe to some extent, but at the same time, Suicide Squad made a lot of money. Oh, and then the Suicide Squad movie that's way better completely failed. Like, what the fuck? Oh, you want to know a really good one that didn't do well? Blade Runner 2049. And now Furiosa as well. Like the big budget movies that come out that really interest me tend to be the ones that don't have a very solid track record. So I can't really, just from my tastes, I can't really back the perspective of, yeah, oh yeah, there's just the consumers want good movies. That's how you get success. But oh, pity the ills of the theater industry that this movie has come out in the midst of and added to the fuel to the fire. But yeah, just in conclusion, I don't want it to be all about how well a movie does and for that to taint how it's perceived. Because my big takeaway and the most important thing is the quality of the film and the whole quality of the Mad Max franchise. It's a special franchise to me. It's goofy and it's also got this like edge to it and it's all wacky and shit, post apocalyptic and all that. It scratches an itch that no other movies really do. Oh, and it's also badass and it's really well thought out. There's a lot of like thought that goes into it. You can tell. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that's basically yeah. And all the effort and commitment that goes into the practical effects and the toll that that takes on the crew, as well as all the work that the FVF I fucking hate this word, but like VFX artists put into the CGI. It's all some really commendable stuff. And of course George Miller, he's a goddamn if we need to get that motherfucker immortality. I want as much Mad Max shit. And we need like billionaires to be funding this shit. Okay, if I was a rich man, I would be doing some crazy things, okay? But we're not there yet. And who knows if we will be. You just got to keep on pumping on and hoping for the best. I hope for more Mad Max. And I will end this video here. Good night.